The three sisters who never walked out. They did not scream. They did not run. And when the door finally opened, 3 lives had already vanished. On the morning of February 12, 2009, silence became the first warning. In Nanning City, Guangxi Province, 30-year-old Tan Xiaomai woke with an unease she could not explain. Her phone showed no missed calls, no messages. That alone was not unusual. What unsettled her was something else. All 3 of her younger sisters were unreachable. One by one, their phones rang unanswered, then went straight to voicemail, then powered off. That had never happened before. The 4 sisters had built their lives around constant contact. Work schedules, family matters, small updates shared throughout the day. Distance had never weakened that bond. Yet that morning, every line went dead at the same time. Xiaomai tried again. And again, there was no reply. By late morning, anxiety replaced patience. She left for the Jiazhou apartment complex where her sisters lived. The building was ordinary, a place where neighbors nodded politely and routines repeated without interruption. Nothing about it suggested urgency or danger. Apartment 703 was quiet. Xiaomai pressed the doorbell. She waited. Nothing. She pressed it again. The hallway echoed with the dull sound, unanswered. She knocked. Louder this time. Still no response. Minutes passed. Then tens of minutes. The door did not open. Her thoughts raced. Gas leak. Sudden illness. An accident inside the apartment. She went downstairs to the building management office asking for an emergency key. The answer was simple and unhelpful. There was none. She was advised to contact the police and call a locksmith. By 7 a.m. Mom. Xiaomai was standing inside a police station explaining why 3 young women had vanished without warning. She described her sisters. Dam Jaimai, 24. Dam Asan, 22. Dam Xiaobin, 20. Hardworking. Independent. Close. The kind of people who did not disappear without explanation. 2 days earlier, the 4 sisters had been together with their parents in Shangzhou County. Dinner had been ordinary. Plans were discussed. Laughter shared. Nothing felt final. That night, Xiaomai left early for Guangzhou. Her 3 younger sisters returned to Nanning. They were never seen again. Police officers accompanied her back to the apartment complex. The clothing store the sisters ran together was closed well past opening hours. Their electric scooter remained parked downstairs. Everything suggested interruption, not departure. When the door to apartment 703 was finally opened, the air inside was normal. No gas. No signs of struggle. No broken furniture. The apartment was tidy up. Wallets. Bank cards. Personal documents. Nothing valuable was missing. It looked like 2 young women had simply stepped out. The only detail that felt out of place was a pile of unwashed clothes near the balcony. Laundry left behind. An everyday routine frozen mid-motion. There were no screams reported. No forced entry. No witnesses. No surveillance cameras in the aging building. The case was classified as a missing persons investigation. At that moment, no one knew that the search had already come too late, because what the police were looking for no longer existed inside that apartment. The crime had already been completed. What no one knew was that the crime had already been completed. In the first 48 hours after the disappearance, everything about apartment 703 appeared deceptively normal. That normality became the most dangerous lie in the case. Police officers documented the interior carefully. 2 bedrooms, 1 living room, a small balcony, no broken locks, no shattered glass, no overturned furniture. The apartment did not resemble a crime scene. It resembled a pause. Personal belongings remained untouched. Cash lay openly on a desk. Bank cards were still inside drawers. Identification documents had not been disturbed. Nothing suggested robbery. Nothing suggested haste. If the two sisters who lived there had left, they had done so calmly. That assumption guided the investigation in the wrong direction. Because while apartment 703 showed no obvious signs of violence, it also showed no signs of departure. Shoes were left behind. Handbags remained where they usually were. And the washing machine was silent. Investigators noted the pile of unwashed clothes near the balcony. According to the eldest sister, this detail mattered. Damjai Mai, the second sister, did not own a washing machine. Each night after work, she would cross the hallway to do laundry at apartment 703. It was a routine so consistent that its interruption stood out immediately. The laundry had been started, but never finished. That detail suggested timing. Someone had arrived. Something had interrupted the ordinary flow of the evening. Yet the room offered no answers. No blood was visible. No smell lingered. Windows were closed. Curtains were drawn. At this stage, the case was officially categorized as a missing persons investigation. That classification carried consequences, because it meant the apartment was not sealed. Family members entered repeatedly, searching for clues. Friends came and went. Belongings were moved. Surfaces were touched. Whatever fragile traces might have existed were gradually erased by concern and desperation. By the time specialized investigators would later return, the scene had already been compromised. The building itself offered little help. Jiaju apartment complex was old. Surveillance cameras had never been installed in its corridors. No footage existed to track movement in or out. Neighbors reported nothing unusual. No screams. No arguments. No suspicious sounds during the night in question. The absence of witnesses created a vacuum. Police turned to social circles. According to statements, Dam Asan and Dam Xiaobin enjoyed nightlife. They danced. They visited bars. They had wide social networks connected to their clothing business. Officers canvassed nightclubs and bars they were known to frequent. No one had seen them. Phones were traced. No activity after the night they disappeared. No messages sent. No calls made. Not even a signal ping. It was as if all three sisters had vanished at once. Public appeals followed. Flyers were posted. Media coverage increased. Photographs of three smiling young women filled television screens and newspaper columns. The city began to take notice. Days passed. Nothing changed. Behind the scenes, investigators faced a growing concern. Missing persons rarely disappear without leaving a trail. Financial transactions. Transportation records. Online activity. None of it existed here. The absence was too complete. Then 4 days after the initial report, the case took a turn no one was prepared for. On the afternoon of October 16, 2009, two construction workers took a shortcut through a wooded hillside in Liangqing district, on the outskirts of Nanning. The area was remote, quiet, rarely visited. They noticed a smell. At first it was faint, easy to dismiss. But as they moved closer, the odor intensified. Following it into the bushes, they found a green cloth bag. The design was childish. Hello, Kitty? Something that did not belong in a place like this. Dark stains marked the fabric. Sensing danger, the workers did not open the bag. They went directly to the police. Within 30 minutes, officers secured the area. When the bag was opened, the contents confirmed the worst possible outcome. Human remains. The search expanded. Nearby, investigators discovered 8 more bags scattered along the hillside. All similar in size. All carefully placed. Each contained parts of a human body. 9 bags in total. They were sent to forensic specialists for reconstruction and identification. As technicians began the process of reassembly, a horrifying picture emerged. The remains belonged not to one victim, but 3. 3 women. At that moment, officers recalled the missing persons case that had dominated local news just days earlier. Facial reconstruction and database comparison followed. The results were immediate. All 3 victims were the Dam sisters. The city of Nanning was thrust into fear. This was no longer a disappearance. It was a calculated, methodical triple murder involving dismemberment and disposal. The brutality suggested planning, familiarity, control. And yet the killer had left almost nothing behind. No witnesses, no cameras, no forced entry. Only silence, and a crime scene that had already been cleaned. The silence was not empty. It was staged. Once the identities of the victims were confirmed, the investigation changed tone. What had begun as a missing persons case became one of the most disturbing homicide investigations Nanning had ever seen. The forensic findings were precise. All 3 sisters had been killed before their bodies were dismembered. The cuts were deliberate, controlled. Whoever did this was not acting in panic. He had time. He had privacy. And he knew exactly what he was doing. That realization raised an immediate and terrifying question. Where could someone dismember 3 bodies without being seen or heard? The answer led investigators back to apartment 703. By the time national-level investigators arrived, the scene had already been compromised. Because the case was initially treated as a disappearance, the apartment had not been sealed. Family members had cleaned. Neighbors had entered. Days had passed. Still, forensic teams searched every surface. They found blood, not visible at first glance, but embedded deep into the fabric of the sofa, inside the bathroom drain, on the soles of sneakers left behind. Under ultraviolet light, the apartment revealed what the eye could not see. DNA analysis confirmed it. The blood belonged to all 3 sisters. Apartment 703 was not a place they had left. It was where they had died. The killer had cleaned the scene thoroughly. Water, detergent, rearrangement of furniture. The goal was clear: to erase violence, to create the illusion of normality. That level of control suggested something else. Familiarity. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No damaged doors. The victims had either known their attacker or had been caught completely off guard. Investigators leaned toward the latter. Attention turned to the environment surrounding the apartment. The Jiazhou complex was small. Neighbors lived close to one another. People recognized faces. Yet when questioned, no one recalled seeing anything unusual. No one heard screams. No one noticed anyone carrying large bags out of the building. Even the building manager reported nothing. 9 heavy bags had been removed from the scene, transported out of the city, disposed of in a remote hillside. And no one remembered seeing a thing. That silence was not accidental. It meant the killer blended in. Investigators examined the bags themselves. 8 were ordinary cloth bags, identical in material, cheap, unremarkable. But one bag stood out. Its material was thicker, better made, different from the rest. That detail became critical. Tracing the manufacturing origin of the bag led police to a factory record. The batch had been produced in August 2004. Approximately 2,000 identical bags were made that day. Half of them had been purchased by a vocational school in Nanning City and distributed to new students. The implication was chilling. The killer may have kept that bag for years. Police obtained enrollment records from the school. Hundreds of former students were reviewed. Names cross-checked. Addresses compared. One detail stood out. 3 former students from that batch lived in the Jiazhou apartment complex. One of them lived directly across from apartment 703, room 709. The occupant was a young man named Lan Tancheng, 24 years old. Recently graduated. Employed. Cooperative when first questioned. On the surface, unremarkable. But timing mattered. Lan had arrived late to work 3 days after the sisters disappeared. Shortly after, he requested consecutive days off. Then he resigned entirely. No explanation. Police revisited his apartment records. The unit had been purchased by his parents. A prime location. City center. Unusual for someone earning a modest salary. The apartment faced directly toward the victim's door. A perfect vantage point. When first questioned, Lon claimed he barely knew the sisters. They were neighbors. Nothing more. No conflict. No connection. At the time, investigators lacked evidence to hold him. Now they did not. DNA samples collected earlier from apartment 703 were re-examined. Among them was the DNA of an unidentified male. When Lon was brought in again and a blood sample taken, the match was immediate. Perfect. A search warrant was executed on apartment 709. Inside the bathroom, investigators found traces of blood. Belongings belonging to the three sisters, and signs of extensive cleaning. Too extensive, as if someone had tried to erase a memory. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Lon Tancheng confessed. His statement revealed a pattern far more disturbing than violence alone. For months, he had watched the sisters through the peephole of his door, studied their routines, listened for footsteps, built fantasies that existed only in his mind. They were unaware. They had never spoken to him beyond casual greetings. On the night of the crime, he cut the power to apartment 703. When one sister stepped out to check the breaker, he entered. What followed was calculated. Restraint. Control. Silence. One by one, all three sisters were subdued. Afterward, Lon moved their bodies to his own apartment. Cleaned the original scene. Waited days before dismembering them. Then transported the remains in stages to the hillside where they were eventually discovered. He did not act in panic. He acted with intent. Psychological evaluations later suggested deep-rooted inferiority, sexual dysfunction, and distorted beliefs about women. But investigators focused on one undeniable truth. This was not a crime of impulse. It was a crime of obsession. The man who killed the sisters was not a stranger from the shadows. He was the neighbor across the hall. The motive was desire. The method was control. The trial of Lon Tancheng did not last long. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA. Blood traces. Confessions. A carefully reconstructed timeline that left no room for doubt. The court rejected arguments of temporary insanity or uncontrollable impulse. Psychiatrists testified that while the defendant showed severe psychological distortion, he was fully aware of his actions. He knew what he was doing, and he knew it was wrong. Lon Tancheng was sentenced to death for intentional murder. Compensation was ordered for the victim's family. On July 22, 2010, the sentence was carried out. He was 25 years old. For the legal system, the case was closed. For the family of the three sisters, nothing was resolved. Three young women who had left their hometown to build a future were erased in a single night. Not because of money. Not because of revenge. Not because of hatred born from conflict. They were killed because someone watched them long enough to believe they belonged to him. That belief was never challenged, until it turned lethal. What makes this case especially disturbing is not only the brutality of the crime, but its proximity. The killer did not break in. He did not force his way inside with violence that alerted the building. He waited. He observed. He blended into the background of ordinary life. Evil did not arrive loudly. It lived across the hall. Investigators later noted how easily routine had been weaponized. The power outage, the unlocked door, the expectation of safety in a familiar space. These were not mistakes by the victims. They were normal human assumptions exploited by someone who had studied them carefully. The apartment building returned to quiet after the case ended. New tenants moved in. Daily life resumed. But for many residents, the silence never felt the same. They had learned that danger does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits patiently, hidden behind an ordinary door. The case of the three sisters became a warning echoed across the country. About obsession left untreated. About distorted desire reinforced by isolation and resentment. About how unchecked fantasies can evolve into violence when reality refuses to comply. Education. Family. Social responsibility. These words often appear after tragedies, spoken too late to change what has already happened. But their absence leaves space for something darker to grow. The three sisters did nothing wrong. They worked. They trusted. They lived. And that is what makes this story so difficult to accept. Because the crime was not inevitable. It was preventable. Ignored until it was irreversible. This case is not only about one man who killed. It is about how silence, neglect, and distorted values can turn desire into a weapon. A weapon aimed at this unsuspecting, wielded from a place that feels safe. When the door to apartment 703 finally opened, the sisters never walked out. They had already been taken. Evil did not break the door. It waited patiently across the hall. Before you leave this story, remember one thing. Cases like this do not end when a verdict is read. They linger in ordinary places. In hallways. Behind doors. In silences we learn to ignore. If you want to continue following investigations where human desire, fear, and neglect quietly turn into violence, stay with this channel. These stories are not meant to shock you. They are meant to make you see what is usually overlooked. The next case reveals how trust inside a family became the deadliest mistake of all. You will see it appear on your screen now. Thank you for watching. And remember, danger does not always force its way in. Sometimes it waits to be invited.